I wore barefoot shoes for 1 year. Here is what happened. In order to introduce more structure into my videos, I decided to introduce more structure into my videos. So first, why barefoot shoes? Second, the research process. Third, the purchase. Fourth, first impressions of the barefoot shoes. Fifth, sending them back. Sixth, settling in. 7, going barefoot exclusive. And 8, the final thoughts. First, why? Why barefoot shoes? There seems to be some evidence pointing towards the fact that the human foot is already pretty good as it is. So when in the 1900s, basically in the last century, people had the idea to bring people, to make people, to motivate people to run more, a few people came up with the idea that you could just take normal running shoes, at this time not like this, but much more pretty flat running shoes, kind of track running shoes you could say, and try to make them more similar to a normal suit shoe or dress shoe. How did they actually approach this? They took these running shoes and they just increased the sole in the back. Therefore, from this point in time on, all these people who wore these shoes would not have to have that much muscle, because they just could use the cushion that is in the back in order to not use as much muscle and tendons and ligaments, in order to soften the impact whenever trying to run. This did a few things, and one of these things were, if you normally try to walk or run barefoot, what you don't do is this here and then rolling, but what you instead do is your cadence length shortens actually, and you do this more. So the whole process looks more like this, or even like this, and then you roll. So therefore, the walking and running patterns changed because of the shoe changes. So now, what is the idea behind a barefoot shoe? The idea is to just get rid of the artificial cushion in the back, and therefore to just have a glove for your feet. Think of your hand maybe. Gloves for your hand just have the same density of material on pretty much all the different parts of your hand. You don't have a cushion on your hand, like here for example, that is 2 centimeters. Why? Because then you have all the sensations in your hand and you can actually use your hand normally. And your hand and your feet are actually quite similar. They both have 5 fingers or toes, and they both can spread out in order to apply pressure to a bigger surface, mainly the ground, and they both can feel a lot of things. And when trying to feel a lot of things, it becomes apparent that it is very preventing this feeling when you actually have a very thick sole and additionally a very thick cushion. So that's kind of the background. So now, why did I go for barefoot shoes? I had for a few years a few problems with my posture, and so because the posture is something that influences so many other things, like how much testosterone you have, there seems to be, and also how much self-confidence you display, because your posture actually changes your hormone levels and your brain chemistry over time if you implement a good posture or if you have a bad posture. There's a reason why in movies people who are sad, who should be displayed as sad, look like this, whereas people who should be displayed as confident walk around like this and act like this all the time. So now the idea is, in order to improve my posture, and also including one of these elements, including my foot posture, is that I also tried to improve my foot posture. I tried to optimize my foot posture, and therefore I went for barefoot shoes. Now the second point, the research. The main problem now was this: I would have to find a company that I would not only try, but ideally would have a good selection, a selection that would fit my criteria, and also a company I just could count on in the future, because otherwise I would have to constantly research barefoot shoes, which is not something I really want to spend my time with. So here are the constraints. I tried at the same time to minimize my wardrobe, to basically have a few basic items that I would just wear over and over again, because I also could, because I also had multiples of these items. In terms of the numbers of items, I went for different numbers depending on the item itself. So when it comes to underwear, for example, I went for one for every day for a month. This means I have 30 pieces of underwear, exactly the same one. And I can also reorder them because I ordered them at H&M. When it comes to socks, it's exactly the same. I used the common time heuristics, the day, the week, the month, and just applied how, basically I just chose one of these times and chose how often I would have to wash this item, and also, of course, how often I would use this item, and then therefore causing the washing cycle. Now, when it comes to shoes, it's a little bit different. And I had made a few rules already when it comes to the item number. So, apart from the 7 for the week, apart from the 1 for the day, and apart from 30 for the month, what I also decided is that I would either get 2, because otherwise you just have 1, and if 1 breaks down, then you have none. And if you have none, and you now try to replace the one thing with something else, and the first thing is not available as an identical item anymore, then you have a problem, because then you have now 2 different items. And this is not what I wanted to have. I wanted to have identical items. Of course, these are not completely identical, but these just are similar, because these are actually 2 different things. But I wanted to have the identical article. This is what I'm trying to say. Just 2 times, because I just then would not have to think about these anymore. So here are the numbers I settled with. I settled with 2, with 5, with 10, with 25, with 30 for the month. So basically I take just even heuristics and multiples of 2 or multiples of 5. In practice, this means I have 2 of these shirts. I have 5 short sleeve shirts. I have 5 long sleeve shirts. I have 30 pieces of underwear. I have 30 pieces of socks. I have 30 pieces of short socks and 30 pieces of long socks for the winter. I have 2 hoodies. And now I would also have how many pairs of shoes? That's the question. Ideally, 2 pairs of shoes. 2 pairs of shoes that would be identical. Another constraint apart from the numbers was that I wanted to go monochrome, or even just black and white. This is not entirely black, but the idea is that I would get all the items I would get, such as my watch, such as Galaxy Buds, such as my phone, such as the case for my phone, such as my wallet, such as the Zoom H6, just in black, because black is a color that disappears, and items are not things that are that important in my life. At least I try to reduce the importance of items. And it actually also, if you are in a room, for example, like this, there's a box in the back, but it's black, therefore you don't really see it all the time. There's a black background, but you don't really see the background because it's just black, it's just no color. And therefore also, by having clothes that are black, you would just reduce the color aspect, and it would be a much easier choice, because black is also, and white just happen to be the colors that are the most available in terms of products, because they're also universal. So still in the second part, the research. I tried to find a company I could rely on. When it comes to clothes, when it comes to casual clothes, I already found H&M as my source for clothes. So whenever I now buy an item, I just go directly to H&M and try and see if they have something. And if they have something, then I try this first and don't go to any other store. Why? Because this means for the rest of my life, I just have a source for my clothes, and I also can replace them. And since H&M, for example, offers staples and offers them over time, kind of consistently compared to something or some store like Primark, then I can just go, and if I lose one shirt of these, even though this is not by H&M, which is another story, but I could just then go to H&M and order the same exact item again within a few minutes, seconds basically. And I would completely eliminate the research that would I otherwise do, because I don't want to spend money on waste. I also don't want to use transportation service unnecessarily, and I also don't want to walk around in stores trying on clothes. I actually have, at least in my opinion, better things to do with my time. So now the idea was that I would get one store, and this one store ideally would already provide a selection of barefoot shoes, and in the future also would be stable enough to still provide these barefoot shoes, not unlike many of these Amazon stores where you buy something from them and then 2 months after the listing is gone. So I searched for H&M. I searched at H&M for barefoot shoes, but turns out they don't have barefoot shoes. I also searched at the equivalent for sport equipment and for sport clothes at Decathlon, but they also didn't really have barefoot shoes. And also Decathlon just constantly changes what they have in store. So therefore I went to different barefoot outlets, not really analog, but much more digitally. So I took a look at VIVOBAREFOOT. I took a look at Merrell, which also offers barefoot shoes. I took a look at other companies, and also I took a look at very cheap solutions on Amazon. Maybe I would just get a cheap solution. When it comes to cheap solutions for shoes on Amazon, I made the experience that these cheap solutions didn't, over time, didn't very well go down, you could say. So basically, I bought a few shoes, bought 4 pairs of shoes, each was only 20 euros, and over time they all degraded very fast. So I finally settled with Vivo, and now here is why. This is part 3, the purchase. The Vivos seemed to be the shoe that was the most universal. They also seemed to be a very good barefoot shoe. They also seem to be not really evolving in terms of the style. So if you take a look at this shoe, this is the Primaslide 3, and you compare it to the Primaslide 2, most people couldn't even notice any difference at all, apart from a few minor changes. So therefore also, if the Primaslide 3 in 5 years is out of stock, I would probably be able to get the Primaslide 5, and I would have more or less identical items, but they wouldn't look as 2 completely different shoes or shoe models. So now let's see what the Primaslide 3 are all about. I wanted one shoe that could do it all. So if I, for example, went in the morning to a library, or was exploring a city, or was running a marathon, and then in the afternoon I would do something completely different, ideally I would be able to wear the same shoe. And this concept of having a shoe that you don't constantly have to switch is something that is just so good, it's just so practical. Before, for example, when I went on vacation and I went to the sea, basically, to sand and the beach, then I, for running in the morning, had to get my running shoes, and had to, if I then had only one bag or one rucksack or one backpack, I additionally would have to carry my running shoes with me. And now a few advantages of the VIVOBAREFOOT, and also in terms of the VIVOBAREFOOT as a prime model, as a prime example for a good barefoot shoe. First of all, it's not that heavy, so therefore it's not that heavy. That's in terms of weight. In terms of volume, it's basically collapsible. You can even do this, even though this probably puts a lot of stress on these things. But in terms of packing size, these are just very light to pack. Therefore, you can get a second pair of VIVOBAREFOOTs for specifically for sport, for example, and still be able to put it in a backpack without this backpack then having to carry something like this here, which is a lot heavier and which is kind of the trail model of the Primus. So when it comes to now deciding which VIVOBAREFOOTs to get, I already had the neutral solution for basically everything. Could I wear these shoes, for example, to a wedding if I wouldn't have any dressing shoes? Yes, I guess. If they would look kind of new and not that worn down as they look already. But even if, I mean, I theoretically could wear these shoes. Compare these to fancy Nike. Are these shoes for a wedding? Not so much as these, because these are just more neutral. Could you wear these for running? Yes. Could you wear these for going to the grocery store? Yes. Could you use them for your morning run in the mud? Yes. But they probably would get wet. This is already one of the downsides of a barefoot shoe. A barefoot shoe that is as breathable as the primer slide. It very easily gets wet. But the whole idea of a barefoot shoe is to have less stuff on your shoe, to basically have a minimal glove that protects you from glass splinters or other things that are on the ground. So if you live in a city, for example, there are constantly people throwing around empty bottles, and then you have these things you can actually step on that are quite hurtful and painful. I've heard from third-party experience. So now here is the idea. I would get these as the short version because of the short sleeves and long sleeves, because of many other things that also come in short and long. So basically as a simplified downstripped version that is for warmer climate, and also as a longer version that is warmer, which comes for longer climate. And I would get these basically as my summer shoes, as my running shoes, as my neutral all-around shoes. But additionally, I would also want something for the winter, because I wanted to go all in with the barefoot shoes. I got the Magna Trail 2. So why these? These are, in comparison to these shoes, waterproof. These are kind of very identical looking, apart from the fact that they have more profile, and yeah, well, they are basically almost the same shoe, just in waterproof and for trail running. Not for trail running, but for trails. So I needed to replace all the different kinds of shoes I had. Running shoe, this one. Normal sneaker, this one. A shoe for just doing a quick workout, this one. Basically also the gym shoe, this one. A gym shoe has additionally the part where it is already flat, because otherwise you cannot do squats very efficiently. And you put stress on the wrong parts of your body. So basically every scenario, apart from the scenario covered by these, would be covered by these shoes. Now, one of these scenarios is hiking. And of course I could hike with these, but here is a major problem with hiking and these. They don't have a very good profile. So they are kind of slippery actually. So if you run in the woods, for example, these are kind of a problem. And also, whenever you get into barefoot shoes and you haven't worn barefoot shoes before, you just need more, as if you didn't really know how to move your hands properly. You just have to learn how to move your feet properly and to pay actually much more attention to where you actually step on, because that's so important, especially with barefoot shoes, and especially if you have kind of a low profile shoe. So therefore I got these for winter, and I also got these for building snow castles in the winter, and also for doing something like going skiing and then having to have a shoe where I actually at the hut on the mountain could walk outside, for example. Or I would just do an expedition to Mount Everest, which I haven't done yet, and there is also no plan, but I just wanted to mention this. So therefore I would have two shoes to cover it all. Part 4. First impressions. The first impression was that, wow, these are so big, these are so big, these are so big, my feet are too small, these are so big. I usually have size 41 European. The problem now was that these were just very, very big. And since I ordered them online and I didn't try them in store, because I didn't have a VIVOBAREFOOT store near door, what happened was that I tried these, and my big toe actually was maybe here. And I just didn't really know what to do with this. I had tried the size before, and I also, I had tried the size before, but there is actually a size guide provided by Vivo that you actually can print out. But of course there is a margin of, there's a possibility, a likelihood of an error, because sometimes if you print something out, it's not displayed one by one. So the problem kind of was that I didn't really know whether to trust this guide. And I also didn't really know whether I actually got the right size. So of course I looked into the label and it said size 41, and I wore size 41 for the last years, apart from a few minor deviations where I had 41.5 or sometimes 40 or 40.5 depending on the shoe. But also, in terms of minimalism and in terms of choice architecture, I just wanted to know that this was the shoe in the right size for the next years. So therefore, I would always just go for size 41 if I would buy a shoe, because historically, that's been the size that actually fitted me the most. Now, here's the problem with this approach. Imagine your hand, and imagine you hold your hand together like this. And now imagine it's a little bit more crumbled. And this is basically how feet look, how the feet look of most people. They are not very well trained. They don't really know how to move. You cannot even lift an individual toe probably. And therefore, the problem is that if you now would measure your foot, it would actually not be the right foot size, because your foot actually looks like this and not like this. So now the problem is that if you have worn normal shoes in the past, your shoe size might be different. But now again, it's a kind of a theoretic game, not really a prisoner's game, a prisoner's dilemma, you could also say. Because now, I as the consumer know this fact of, okay, this is not my real foot size, but also the companies know. And the companies now have to determine what consumers actually already know about this topic, and the fact that over time probably their feet will grow, even though it doesn't grow, it just spreads out. So the problem is that it's a game of cat. It's a prisoner's dilemma. You don't know what the other person will do, and therefore you try to predict what the other person is doing. But if you then try to predict what the other person is doing, and you try to include the thought of what the other person is doing into your own acting, then it just repeats itself endlessly. So the approach Vivo took is this. They just made the shoes that are kind of equivalent to the normal size you would have, for me size 41, and then they just made it bigger. So therefore, when I now got the shoe, I was like, oh, this is way too big, because my foot was not normal, basically, because my foot was completely cramped all the time. So now, when I wore these shoes, I constantly tipped over, because there is just basically a thumb of space in the front. So basically this cap is just empty space. And this is just something you have to get used to, because over time you actually will fill the space with your toes, and you shouldn't really fill the space totally. So therefore, what makes sense is size 41, but maybe even size 42 in the future, if you then have a good trained foot. So the first impression was, first of all, they were very expensive, which was also a reason I have to look up the word, and it just came to me. I was hesitant to buy these, because for 130 euros, this was quite an investment compared to a normal shoe like this one here, like the Nike Free Air 2, I think are these. And I just got them at a sales for 60 euros, so basically more than half the price. And the Magna Trail 2 came in at a hefty 180 euros. So usually in the past, with sales and things like these, usually got shoes for 50 to 100 euros, I would say. And these are just much more than 50 to 100 euros. And you also almost don't find any used shoes. So for this reason, you cannot really just get a used shoe, a refurbished shoe, and try these. There is actually a company called VIVOBAREFOOT, recycled. I don't really know the company, but it's a website. But this website is basically in every country in the EU, apart from Germany, which is the country I would order, and therefore I had to get the new ones. And also on eBay, and on eBay and on other platforms, I just didn't find a refurbished shoe. And also, the problem with refurbished stuff, or stuff that was already second-hand, basically, that is second-hand, is that you don't really know what the previous owner did with these things. And you also don't really know how these things hold up. When it comes to tech, there is refurbished, which basically means that the seller then gives you guarantee or warranty again, and this is quite a neat solution, because that's basically all you could want. But with stuff you get from private persons, this is something you should consider, because they don't give you warranty, even though they kind of are doing this, which I recently read up on. So still in the fourth point, I thought I would send them back, and I thought I should get a smaller size. I should get a smaller size. These are too big, I should get a smaller size. These are too big, I should get a smaller size. Basically, these thoughts repeated around 50 to 250 times in my head. And I knew that if I didn't act on these thoughts, if I didn't do more research, and I actually didn't finish this problem that was ahead of me, then I would not be confident in my solution solving, in my problem solving capabilities when it comes to the shoes, and therefore I would always question whether this was the right decision. Therefore, 5, sending them back and get another size was something I considered, until a very lucky occasion came to me. So I traveled to another city, and there just happened to be a VIVOBAREFOOT store. And in there, for one, I got a little bit of advice from somebody who sold VIVOBAREFOOT shoes for a living, and for 2, I could also try the previous models. So I tried size 40, and what actually happened is that size 40, so the primer slide 2 in size 40 were too narrow, but the primer slide 2 in size 41 were just also smaller than these. So basically VIVOBAREFOOT has expanded their approach to make these a little bit bigger for the consumers, because most consumers don't know about the whole foot expanding thing. So therefore, in this I think, what is it called? Is it chicken and mouse game? Cat and mouse, in this cat and mouse game of trying to get what the other person is thinking, or what the other party is thinking, VIVOBAREFOOT just expanded on this. Why? Because probably more and more people of the general public apply these principles of buying minimalistic things like shoes, also minimalistic, and therefore the average consumer moves more and more into the direction of not knowing the size thing with barefoot shoes. Therefore, I tried them, and I tried size 41, and I thought size 41 would, in the primer slide 2, was actually quite the thing I should be going for. So this was the gut feeling I had, even though I usually try to not trust my gut feeling, because it's just a random thing I cannot control. But the idea wasn't, the person at the store told me that I should probably get these and just order these. Well, I mean, I already had them ordered, but I just would keep these. Part 6, settling in. So even though I had doubts, and I had the gut feeling that this wasn't the right choice, I just decided rationally that it was the right choice, and I would try these in the size I got, size 41, with the VIVOBAREFOOT primer slide 3. And I tried them, and I stumbled a lot, which is also something I do, but it's actually also called stumbling, but also tripping, because there is just empty space in the front of your shoe if you walk upstairs. This constantly happens. So a few times even. So I worked as a job where I basically went up houses and stairs, and I just one time went completely overboard. So it takes some time to get used to barefoot shoes. Actually, barefoot shoes are kind of introducing very risky behavioral patterns or movement patterns into your life. But after some time, basically after a year, I now am accommodated to how these feel and how I should walk in these a little bit more. I mean, these shoes are just too big, and that's the whole point about them being too big. But also over time, your foot expands, and therefore, if you actually have proper foot posture and you don't have your foot equivalent to your hand like this all the time, and to be like, but more like this here. So basically think of your foot as trying to grasp the ground it is on and trying to feel the ground it is on, which is also something that is very good with barefoot shoes, because you can actually, the sensation, so basically your foot is very similar to your hand. So it has a lot of nerve endings. And the reasoning behind this is that you actually have these nerve endings for a reason. So basically you feel the thing that is touching your hand at a much higher rate than compared to touching something that is your chest or your belly, because there are more nerve endings per unit of area. So if you then wear shoes that have 2 centimeter soles, the nerve endings just don't do their job very well, cannot do their job very well. Therefore you are improving the sensitivity of your foot by applying barefoot shoes, and therefore over time you just learn how to walk again. I now tried them for every occasion. I tried them with working out, but I switched basically working out, since I had a home gym at this time, to completely barefoot. And I also boxed barefoot and also did kind of kickboxing barefoot, and it just worked very well. And I also tried to run around indoors just with socks on instead of shoes. Previously I had worn shoes, even shoes with cushioning in them, indoors also, because it just gives you a more dressed up approach. It just simulates the environment of an office more if you are studying or working from home. In the last years, that's something probably many people dealt with. So to sum up point 5, I just decided I would try this, as long as it took until I settled in, or I could basically return them, theoretically. So VIVOBAREFOOT has a policy where you can return these shoes up to 1 year, I think, if you are not satisfied with the quality or how they perform over time. The problem is just, again, within Germany, there is this exception where you can only get them from a different company, which is also owned by Vivo, but you cannot return them. So you can only return them within the 30 days usual return policy. Kind of a bummer. Which leads us, more or less, without a smooth transition, to point 7. Going all exclusive on barefoot shoes. After quite some time in these barefoot shoes, I realized whenever I switched back, all the bad foot posture came back within a day, because it wasn't a habit enough. It wasn't enough of a habit. So the problem was, if I now wore shoes like these, within a day, I again stomped onto my heel all the time. And then, if I switched to running barefoot, which is something I also tried, but also with barefoot shoes, I would just also stomp on here. The problem is just on barefoot shoes, or also when being barefoot actually, you don't have cushioning in here. Therefore, everything begins to hurt. Why? Because you're not activating your muscles enough up to the point where you actually can catch the impact of you trying just running around as if you had shoes with cushioning on them. And that's one of the main reasons I then decided to try to get rid of as many old shoes as possible. So very conveniently in this time, after a few years of having multiple pairs of shoes, all these multiple pairs of shoes just again and again and again just were at the point where I couldn't use them anymore because they had just holes in them, and then I just threw them away. So it just so happened that all the shoes I bought a few years ago, when I basically had reached my maximum height, were also now at a point where they were degraded that much that I could very easily throw them away, or I also sold a few shoes. So therefore, in order to go all in for barefoot shoes, I still had only these 2 pairs, which is something that is quite weird. But I had in my mind always the thought that I would move again to a different city, and also maybe to a different city where I could not move towards or to with the car. So therefore, I would have to have a very minimal volume package of just belongings, and therefore just having 2 pairs of shoes was just something I wanted to try, because I would have to try anyway if I went backpacking in South Asia for a month, because then I would also, then something like this, something like a shoe that has everything, or that covers all the different scenarios where you would normally use different shoes, just comes in very handy. And it is just so convenient to have one shoe to do it all. You can go to the library for the entire afternoon, and you don't have to worry about switching your shoes when you then afterwards do a round of parkour, or do a round of calisthenics, or you theoretically go to the gym. Or of course in a gym it's kind of different, because you have to have clean shoes, and therefore maybe a second pair would be nice. But again, if you are traveling to a city and you are walking around all day, and then you additionally go to a gym or go for a run, these are things you now just can do. Also, this was another huge problem I had with the different pairs of shoes. Whenever you are backpacking, for example, and then you realize you actually need to get the train, and then you begin to run because otherwise you don't get the train. If you have just a pair of shoes that is always on you, and that additionally allows you to run as you normally would, because it's simultaneously your running shoe, then you don't have to optimize your shoe selection for these different scenarios. You don't have to think about the fact that if you go to a amusement park, for example, you're in there all day and it could rain, therefore the shoe needs to be waterproof and things like these. You just take your normal shoe, which is the shoe, maybe the only shoe you own, and it's just not a question. You don't have to think about your shoes anymore. Therefore, for all the future packings, for all the future packing lists, my packing list when it comes to shoes just became much easier because I only have a much more limited choice selection, you could say. Therefore, I try to optimize my choice architecture basically by also going very minimalistic with these shoes. Now, since you already know the reason I would want to go barefoot exclusive, since otherwise these bad behavioral patterns, these bad posture patterns came back immediately, and if I then switch to barefoot shoes, these patterns would cause kind of over time serious harm, I decided to go all exclusive on barefoot shoes. Only one problem. I still had these left, and these were kind of barefoot shoes. I also considered Nike and Nike Free in the beginning as kind of my choice for barefoot shoes, since the problem with many of these barefoot shoes is that they look very weird. These don't look very weird, but many shoes do. Many barefoot shoes in particular do look very weird, and they just look normal. They even look cool, I would say. I would even buy this shoe if it wasn't a barefoot shoe, kind of. But with these other barefoot shoes, I'm not so sure. So basically Vivo, again a selection criteria for Vivo, is the company that offers shoes that look the best, I guess, in all of these different selections of companies, in all of the available companies. So I still had these left, and I still liked them, and I also bought them only 2 years before, and I couldn't really sell them because nobody wanted these. They cost me only 50 to 60 euros, and I had them on eBay for quite some time. And then I realized, what if I just cut off this part here? So this is what I did. I just had a giant sandpapering machine, and I just pressed this side on as long as it took to then get down the heel to a density or to a thickness that is similar to the front. And now I have also, in addition, these barefoot shoes, kind of self-made barefoot shoes. A problem is that you have to be very, very careful what you actually sandpaper down, what you actually trim down, because then if you just take 2 millimeters of this side, of the inner side, of the outer side more, then over time you just have an uneven posture, because this one foot is just 2 millimeters on the inner side too thin. And this is actually what kind of happened. I got accommodated to it, so now I don't notice it anymore, but you have to be kind of careful with something like a shoe that basically is the basis for your whole posture, because your feet are the thing you're standing on. It's the groundwork for your whole posture, you could also say. Which leads us, and also leaves us probably soon, to point 8. The final conclusion. Even though realizations like I should go all barefoot and should get rid of all the other shoes is something that is true at a certain point in time, the perceived importance of such realizations diminishes over time, because you are not experiencing the negative side effects of basically the alternative solution where you wouldn't make this decision. So therefore, over time, realizations you have, such as I should get rid of all other shoes because otherwise the posture, and then if I get into barefoot shoes back, then this problem, and this probably hurts me over time, is something that diminishes over time. And therefore, right now, for example, if you would ask me if I should keep the other shoes, I would say, yeah, maybe just in case. And this is kind of dumb, but this is also how many people, I guess, including me, think all the time. I'm, of course, extrapolating from my own behavior onto other people. So therefore, what I am seeing with myself is that I should take past decisions more seriously, and in particular the past decision to go all in on barefoot shoes. The problem is just these are kind of still expensive, and I cannot really justify buying 50 pairs of shoes. And also I don't want 50 pairs of shoes because, as I said, I wanted to have a very minimalistic wardrobe. Not only minimalistic when it comes to the model selection, but also very minimalistic when it comes to the item numbers. So therefore I now still have only this one pair of true VIVOBAREFOOT Primal Slide 3, even though these already begin to dissolve. And here is a trick how you can basically use two pairs at the same time, even though one is basically on the brink of being thrown out. If you think of buying two pairs of shoes, and this is also one of the major downsides of only having one pair of shoes. If you have one pair of shoes, then if this is all the theoretic wear down you could have within a certain time frame, then you apply all this wear down onto one shoe. Therefore, after this 1 year, for example, let's say VIVOBAREFOOT hold for 1 year, you have to get rid of these shoes because these are worn down. If you instead buy two shoes at the same point in time at the beginning of the year, so now instead of having one shoe, you have the same amount of wear down and you just have two shoes, then at the end of year 1, you still have two shoes that are at 50%. Therefore, at now any given point in time within this year, you have basically two shoes available, which is a bigger selection. The same comes true for having multiple deodorants, for example. If you have a given amount of wear down or usage, and you just buy multiple pairs of something or multiple items of something, then the wear down actually allocates among these items evenly, ideally, and then you would have two items available at the same wear down. Of course, another strategy would be that you have one pair of shoes that is very nice, you could also wear to weddings, and another pair of shoes that is wear down you could wear at home, for example, or for running, where it doesn't matter that much. So now, still, final conclusions. First of all, I don't regret the decision with the size. I actually think nowadays that sometimes these are too small for my feet because they have quite a little bit expanded. Also, to keep in mind, if you get shoes like these, keep in mind in some countries it's not always summer, so therefore you actually have to wear woolly socks, for example, Norwegian socks, basically long socks that are thick. And if you now have a shoe that is intentionally already a little bigger, then this comes in very handy with only having one shoe, because you don't have to have different shoe sizes depending on the season. Now, as a final conclusion, I still only have these two pairs of VIVOBAREFOOT shoes. I only still am trying to buy shoes at VIVOBAREFOOT, even though I try to make an exemption because I thought, so basically there was an offer on Amazon on Merrell Vapor Glove 5 for 50 or 60 bucks. And therefore I tried these shoes, but size 41 was basically, in terms of Vivo, probably down like 3 sizes, and it didn't fit me at all. And this again just confirmed my bias and also my strategy that if you research something and it works, then it works for the rest of your life, theoretically, ideally, in an optimal scenario. Then you should not invent the wheel, not try to invent the wheel again and again and again, because this just took like 10 hours of research and trying to find the right offer, and then going into a store and trying again different barefoot shoes, and all it brought me was basically, of course, now a bigger confirmed decision that I should still try VIVOBAREFOOTs also in the future, and I should keep or stick with VIVOBAREFOOTs in the future. But at the same time, yeah, well, it just showed me exactly that my strategy was right. I still haven't covered, though, a major part of this whole scenario, which is weddings and occasions where I would not wear at least worn down VIVOBAREFOOT Primal Slide 3. I probably, if I, for example, was at a very fancy dinner, I probably could wear the nice version of these, the new version of these, very easily, I guess. But there is also this other, so there are different variants of barefoot shoes at VIVOBAREFOOT. A few of these are black, and two options are here. The first are the VIVOBAREFOOT Raw. They look like this. Now it's in focus. Maybe a little bit brighter. Yeah, well, this is what they look like. Let's take a look at the different pictures. And I tried them in store, because I was already in store, to try the VIVOBAREFOOT 5 again. And, well, they are pretty similar to the Primus-Lite 3. But the problem is, if I get these shoes, I can only use them for this one specific scenario, which is basically a few times a year. And now, the videos just... Now the exposure is back to normal again. These are the Raw 3, and there is also a version of these, which are called the Gobi, which are just a little bit longer. So basically, these are half shoes, you could say. These two pairs of shoes would be something I would consider if in the future I would have to replace my previous non-barefoot shoes with something very stylish. But again, I'm also kind of trying to be more environmentally friendly, more eco-friendly. Also including projects like slimming down my towels, basically so replacing my towels with microfiber ones in order to not have that much volume in the washing machine, and therefore reducing the amounts of washing machines I have to do over a lifetime or over a certain period of time. And leather is something that's not really vegan, and well, why would you buy leather if you could also get artificial leather? Or at least, I mean, I don't have a problem with at all that there is no leather in these shoes, so why would I now get leather shoes if I could also get just another pair of VIVOBAREFOOT? So therefore I didn't go for these, and I also just, because I already need Primus-Lite 3 again and a replacement for my normal shoe, I just didn't opt for these yet. I still have a few old dressing shoes which I currently not have at this place, and I already sold a few of these, but with the last one I was just like, oh yeah, but maybe there's an occasion where I need these for one day, and I probably will not buy something like the Raw 2, and then I would have, maybe, but again, this is just weird, not strategic thinking. So therefore, the final conclusion is this. It all worked out in the end, and I'm now very happy with these shoes, even though I still do have problems when running. So the problems didn't really solve themselves, because I just realized more and more that I just previously did not have a good running style at all, and I just stomped my heels into the ground. So therefore, even a year after trying to go for barefoot shoes, and before that I already ran on flat soles for half a year, but still I am constantly in running pain whenever I run, and I cannot really run more than a few kilometers a week, which is sad, and I haven't really found a solution for this problem, apart from getting cushioning shoes, or soles, or shoes with 2 centimeters in the sole. But, well, that's kind of a problem I'm still working on. But I still think this is the right approach, the approach to eventually train myself a correct, very good running posture that then, in theory at least, would eliminate my running pain over time.